Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joaquin Torres, and I'm your elected Assessor-Recorder here in the city.
我係三藩市嘅估值官，我哋好多謝你哋出席我哋2022年家庭財富講座系列嘅第二次嘅家庭財富講座。咁我哋今日咧就會探討關於點樣去明白個房子協會係。首先，我係藉住呢個機會咧，好多謝我哋三藩市公共圖書館咧，為我哋推廣我哋呢個今日嘅講座。我哋辦公室嘅全體人員咧，就係最主要係個工作就係確保嘅城市嘅財務嘅穩定性咧。當然更重要嘅係社區嘅蓬勃發展嘅。最重要嘅
And that's what this family wealth series is about.
你嘅出席同埋你嘅
First,
參與。
we talked about securing a fair appraisal. Then today, we're talking about understanding homeowners associations.
公平嘅房產評估
foreclosure prevention.
咁今日咧，我哋最主要係喺房子協會嘅主題上。咁我哋今日嘅講座咧，除咗頭先嘅講座，咁我哋最主要就係個點樣通過公平嘅房產稅務啦。除此之外咧，我哋都係非常着重喺種族平等成為多元化社區嘅，同埋確保每個人都可以成為呢個房主嘅。咁當然係我哋好似我哋調查啦，就係中等嘅白人家庭嘅財富咧，就係短型黑人家庭嘅8倍，當然亦都係拉丁裔家庭嘅5倍嘅。所以令到睇到呢個估計評估嘅話，個數據咧。明白到説明咗黑人同埋棕色人種家庭對房屋擁有權嘅計劃和資源嘅需求啦，所以亦都係因為咁，我哋係嘅都因為一個種族嘅偏見持續咧，控制咗我哋房地產行業，同埋亦都係會讓成個社會出現呢種情況。咁我哋咧就係要點樣去着重喺為我哋嘅社區咧嘅人士咧，令到我哋每個人都可以成為呢個房產嘅，同埋我哋股值部咧係三藩市，亦都係確保我係有啲社區確保有啲資源啦，可以提供俾我哋嘅社區，甚至你自己啦，或者係你嘅朋友家人嘅。所以我哋嘅設計咧，個計劃啦，呢個講座系列啦，甚至我哋嘅辦公所提供資源啦，最主要就係確保個社區咧有一個得到一個好嘅資源嘅。所以今日咧，我哋就係亦都係有一個關於一個佢嘅好處同埋唔好處喺呢個房產協會方面嘅。咁陣間咧，我哋就會解釋講解呢個房產協會嘅作用啦，同埋點樣去避免一啲咁嘅房屋嘅拍賣呢啲嘅情況。當中亦都有好多資訊咧，會提供俾大家嘅。當然亦都有啲係個人嘅情況啦，亦都係亦都我哋常見嘅一啲普遍嘅情況嘅。所以我哋咧就係要確保幫助大家點樣去盡量去安排好我哋嘅自己嘅經濟為我哋嘅自己嘅安排。所以我哋今日咧就希望就係幫助社區咧去提供資源服務嘅。咁呢個咧就係當中亦都有包括佢嘅房產嘅一啲權利咯，就係幫助我哋嘅加州嘅人士，特別係一啲比較係唔知由邊度入手呢啲嘅家人啦，或者甚至啲老人家嘅。所以我哋今日咧就係非常之榮幸啦，可以請到我哋嘅房產同埋經濟倡導者啦，同我哋講解呢個情況嘅。
Hi everybody. Thank you for participating today. I want to make sure that everybody has gotten to the correct rooms for their interpreter.
好多謝你哋出席我哋今日嘅會議啦。咁我哋今日咧就進入我哋嘅主題啦。我係 Gina。 我係房產經濟倡導者嘅律師部啦，律師啦。咁我哋今日咧，我哋就會講解好多關於點樣個 HOA 房產協會嘅情況，同埋有啲咩常見嘅問題啦。譬如一啲嘅開會啊，一啲評估啊，一啲唔同嘅一啲情況嘅。咁我哋陣間咧就會將個問題咧放到去會議之後再同大家回答嘅。如果你哋係有啲咩問題嘅話，可以而家就放喺我哋 Q&A 個欄嗰度咯，寫出輸入你嘅提問嘅。咁我哋會議完畢之後咧，就會盡量去解答你嘅提問。咁陣間咧，我就會同大家分享我嘅聯絡資料啦。
Feel free to call in and get a one-on-one.
喺會議完畢之後，你可以隨時同我聯絡嘅。
咁你哋咧如果係有問題嘅咧，係可以喺Q&A 嗰度嘅。咁喺 Q&A 嗰個部分咧，我係只係解答一啲嘅普通嘅問題嘅。咁如果呢啲你個人嘅問題啦，你咧就係可以咧係聯絡阿 Kara 啦。咁我哋可以俾咧係一個單對單嘅輔導俾你嘅。咁首先咧，我想講下嘅咧，就係乜嘢咧？係呢個叫做房屋業主嘅協會啦，呢個簡稱係 HOA 啦。咁 HOA 佢係點樣嘅咧？咁因為咧係唔係每一個人咧都係知道呢一個嘅 HOA 佢嘅運作係點嘅。咁譬如話係邊一啲人係可以參加呢個 HOA 啦，或者係邊啲人咧係可以咧係制定呢一個嘅一啲嘅法規啦。咁如果咧係有呢一個 HOA 嘅話咧，就係咧應該係咧有一個嘅HOA 嘅董事局嘅。咁喺董事局裏邊咧就係有一個嘅主席嘅。咁呢一個嘅董事呢一個嘅 HOA 嘅董事局咧，就係代表咧係一啲嘅一啲嘅業主咧係做一個嘅做一個呢個嘅決定嘅。咁咧就係啦，呢一個嘅呢一個 HOA 嘅董事局咧就亦都係可以係制定呢一個政策嘅。咁一般嚟講咧，就係呢一個嘅業主咧，就唔會話係同呢一個嘅呢一個嘅業主聯盟咧 HOA 嘅主席咧係有單對單嘅對話。一般嚟講咧，就係咧如果咧佢哋係有咩問題嘅時候咧，就係咧佢哋可以喺呢一個 HOA 嘅會議嗰度咧就係提出嚟啦。同埋咧就係呢一個HOA 咧就係一般嚟講咧佢哋咧就有一個嘅會係請一個呢一個嘅呢一個物業嘅主管啦。咁佢哋咧就係咧係管理呢一個 HOA 一啲譬如日常運作嘅嘢啦，譬如話係佢哋係要係聯絡啲業主啦，或者係幾時開會啦，咁同埋咧係呢一個嘅業主咧係有啲乜嘢嘅問題啦。咁佢哋咧咁所以嚟講咧就係係啦會係請一個嘅物業嘅經理啦去做呢啲嘅嘢嘅。咁所以嚟講咧就係唔係話係嗰個嘅物業嘅管理處咧佢哋係冇權咧去做呢一個嘅任何嘅決定，係只不過咧係呢一個嘅物業管理處咧就係代表呢一個嘅 HOA 佢哋係代表佢哋咧就係咧係搜集呢一個嘅業主嘅意見啦，或者佢哋有咩嘅問題。咁但係咧係如果係咧任何嘅決定咧都係咧係需要呢一個嘅HOA 啦佢哋嘅董事局咧係決定嘅。咁所以咧呢一個嘅 呢一個嘅任何嘅決定咧，都係呢一個 HOA 啦，佢哋嘅董事局咧係決定嘅。咁好多時啦，呢一個嘅HOA 啦，佢哋嘅董事局咧，佢哋都有亦都有一個嘅律師係代表佢哋嘅。咁同埋咧就係咧，譬如話係有一啲咩嘅法律嘅問題啊，咁咧都係咧係由呢一個 HOA 嘅律師咧，佢哋咧係辦理呢啲法律上嘅嘢嘅。咁好多時咧。譬如話係呢一個嘅有個業主啦，佢咧係未交呢個嘅呢一個嘅 HOA 呢一個嘅呢一個嘅費用啦，咁好多時咧就係呢一個 HOA 咧就係會咧係叫佢哋嘅律師咧就係咧係做一啲嘅法律嘅程序啦，去收呢一啲嘅呢一個 HOA 嘅費用嘅。咁咧好多時咧就係啦，譬如話係呢一個嘅業主啦，譬如話佢冇交齊呢一個 HOA 呢一個嘅費用啦，咁好多時咧就會係收到係一啲收數嘅公司啦，佢哋係會打電話嚟咧，就係咧係話會係咧係收呢一個嘅HOA 呢一個嘅費用嘅。咁不過咧係任何呢一個嘅任何法律嘅行動咧，都係咧要經過呢一個嘅HOA 嘅董事局咧，佢哋係同意先可以做嘅。咁咧所以咧就係咧業主咧好多時咧就係會係收到呢一個嘅律師信啦，或者係呢一個嘅收數公司嘅信，係話係收咧呢一個嘅未交嘅呢一個嘅呢一個嘅費用嘅。咁作為呢一個嘅業主嚟講咧，佢哋咧亦都係咧係有唔同嘅層次啦。咁咧就係咧即使咧係呢一個嘅HOA 嘅呢一個嘅董事局啦，佢底下咧係有唔同嘅部分啦。咁就係咧係負責係唔同嘅嘢嘅。咁另外一樣咧就係咧好多人咧就係知道咧就係呢一個HOA 啦，佢有啲乜嘢嘅法例咧係要跟嘅。咁我而家咧就會係咧係講下咧係關於呢個HOA 啦，佢哋有啲咩嘅法例。第一個咧就係呢個 CC&R 啦，呢一個嘅法例啦，簡稱咁呢個嘅 CC&R 咧就係代表呢一個院嘅呢一個嘅記錄嗰個嘅檔案上邊嘅。咁如果咧係嗰個嘅HOA 啦，佢哋咧係有呢一個嘅董事局嘅話咧，佢哋咧亦都會係同埋咧你嗰個物業咧，亦都會係記錄喺 CC&R 呢一個嘅檔案上邊嘅。咁咧就呢一個嘅呢個 CC&R 啦，呢一個嘅法例咧就係會咧係監管呢一個嘅究竟係呢一個嘅HOA 嘅費用係點啦，係點樣用啦。咁另外咧就係呢一個嘅 HOA 嗰個嘅董事局咧，佢一啲嘅會章啦。咁呢個會章咧就會係講咧，就係話譬如話係呢一個董事局咧係幾時係會開會一次啦。咁同埋咧呢啲呢一個嘅業主咧佢亦都會咧係收到呢一個 CC&R 咧嘅副本啦，同埋一啲HOA 董事局咧佢嘅會規咧嘅一啲嘅副本嘅。咁如果咧你哋咧係冇呢一啲嘅副本嘅話咧，你哋咧係可以咧係 同呢一個嘅 HOA 咧嘅董事局啦係索取呢一啲索取呢一啲嘅副本嘅咁咧因為咧你能夠咧係能夠係多啲咧係了解係關於呢一個嘅HOA 呢一個佢哋嘅法規啦，同埋嘅章規咧，係對作為一個業主嚟講咧係好重要㗎咁所以咧就係你哋咧就係咧係可以咧就係睇下咧係呢一個 CCL and R 啦，同埋一啲嘅法規咧係乜嘢嘢咁第三樣咧就係屬於咧係呢一個嘅法例同埋一啲嘅規則㗎啦咁呢一啲嘅法例咧同埋規則咧有陣時咧佢亦都係會係改變嘅咁譬如話係咧而家咧呢一個嘅董事局咧就係決定一啲物業公共嘅地方咧可以用嘅地方咧有冇轉變啦譬如話嗰個游泳池啦佢哋嘅開放嘅時間係點啦咁所以咧呢一個嘅法例咧同埋呢個規則咧就係好多時候咧就係都係會係改變嘅咁最後一個咧就係叫做係 Davis and Sterling 呢一個嘅 Act 呢個嘅 Davis and Sterling 法案啦咁呢個嘅法案咧就係咧係啦係要係無論咧每一個嘅 HOA 啦佢哋嘅董事局咧佢哋咧都係要遵守呢個 Davis Sterling 呢一個嘅法規嘅咁譬如話係舉例嚟講咧譬如話呢個 David Sterling Act 啦佢會話咧就係話咧係呢一個嘅HOA 嘅董事局咧任何嘅通知咧都係一定咧係要係4日之前咧就係通知嘅咁即係換句説話咧就係譬如話佢哋自己呢一個HOA 嘅董事局咧佢哋自己嘅章規咧係可能係俾多啲嘅時間係個業主嘅咁但係咧佢哋咧呢個嘅自己本身嘅章規咧就一定唔可以係違反 David and Sterling 呢一個嘅法規嘅咁所以咧如果咧你哋咧係需要喺呢一方面想知道多啲嘅資料咧，你哋可以同我哋嘅辦公室係聯絡啦咁我哋係可以係俾多一啲嘅諮詢你哋嘅咁咧就有好多人咧就係問咧係關於呢一個嘅董事局嘅會議嘅問題啦咁如果咧你係屬於呢一個嘅呢一個嘅房屋協會嘅話咧 HOA 嘅話咧咁好多時咧你都係知道咧係會有一個咧係常規嘅會議啦咁呢一個嘅董事局嘅會議咧就係通常咧就係會係討論一啲而家係有啲咩問題譬如話佢哋想係決定係請咩嘅公司啦，係幫佢哋係董事局做嘢咁樣樣呢啲咁嘅問題咧都會係喺呢一個嘅董事局嘅會議裏邊咧係討論㗎。咁如果咧佢哋呢一啲咧係佢哋咧可以咧如果係有興趣參加呢啲嘅會議嘅話咧就係咧你可以咧就睇下咧呢一啲嘅董事會議咧係幾時開會啦，同埋咧佢哋係喺邊度開會啦咁一般嚟講咧就係咧佢哋咧董事局咧係最少咧係開會之前嘅4日咧係俾你哋嘅通知嘅咁就係同埋咧就係啦佢哋呢一個嘅會議咧就係如果係開會最少係4日之前係通知業主啦同埋咧亦都會話俾你聽咧呢一個董事局嘅會議咧佢嗰個議程係乜嘢嘢嘅咁 如果咧嗰個嘅如果佢哋自己本身嘅章規咧就話係咧係要1個星期之前咧係通知嘅話咧，咁佢哋咧亦都可以跟佢哋自己本身嘅章規就話係1個星期咧係之前嘅，但係最少咧都要4日之前嘅咁咧我咧亦都係見到有啲嘅例子咧，就係話咧係嗰啲嘅業主啦，佢哋咧係有興趣係參加呢一啲嘅董事局嘅咁好多時咧係呢一個嘅董事HOA 嘅董事局咧係淨係咧係俾呢一個嘅業主參加，但係有陣時咧就係呢個 HOA 嘅業主咧嘅董事局咧，佢亦都可以俾其他人嘅參加嘅。咁就仲有咧就係呢一個嘅開會之前咧，就係一般嚟講咧就係會係通知嘅呢一個嘅會員啦，就係啦嗰一日嘅會議咧就係會係討論一啲乜嘢嘅問題嘅咁因為咧譬如話咧係每個人咧係個人咧係佢有啲嘅問題咧，想喺呢一個嘅董事會議咧講嘅話咧咁咧就係咧佢哋亦都可以喺呢一個嘅董事局咧係提出但係咧呢一個嘅董事局咧係一般嚟講咧佢哋咧都係想係會係跟翻嗰日嘅議程嘅咁嚟講咧就係喺董事局嘅時候咧就係有呢一個嘅時間啦係俾個別嘅業主佢哋咧係講佢哋嘅意見出嚟通常咧就係譬如話係有幾分鐘嘅時間啦係俾佢哋咧公眾發言嘅時間嘅咁佢哋咧呢一個嘅會員啦佢哋咧就係可以咧係喺呢一個嘅董事局嘅會議裏邊咧就係提佢嘅問題咁但係咧就係咧未必咧就係喺開呢一個董事局會議嘅時候咧嗰啲董事咧係未必會咧係喺會議裏邊咧就係解答你哋嘅佢哋嘅問題㗎因為咧呢一個嘅董事局嘅開會咧佢係要跟翻咧係之前咧係做好咗嘅議程㗎咁所以嚟講咧就係咧如果你有一個嘅個別嘅問題咧就係喺呢一個嘅董事局裏邊咧係可以係提出啦，但係咧就係未必喺當日嘅董事局嘅會議裏邊咧係會解答你哋嘅問題嘅咁如果咧係你哋係有問題嘅話咧我贊成啦，你哋咧就係之前咧就係寫封信咧就係話俾董事局聽等佢哋咧係知道咧係你哋有咩嘅問題咧係想喺呢一個嘅董事局裏邊咧係提出嘅咁等佢哋咧係可以係之前係知道嘅咁所以咧就係我覺得咧就係最好嘅方法咧就係咧你有任何嘅問題咧都可以係之前咧就係提出。
Is that many homeowners notice that there are these general board meetings that members are allowed to attend. And then
我哋就知道有啲會議咧就係可以每個人都可以出席咧會議，但係有啲咧就係要規定係執委會可以出席嘅。因為個普通大會咧就係開放俾所有嘅會員啦，但係咧HOA 嘅房屋管理嘅執行部咧就只有呢啲執行委員係可以係出席嘅，亦都係被邀請嘅，因為佢哋要講嘅係一啲比較私人嘅一啲提問啦。咁提問討論關於啲法律上嘅問題咁所以呢個就係譬如話如果係關於一啲 一啲財務上嘅收集啊，呢啲嘅會議啊，呢啲都係唔會係開放俾對一般嘅委員係唔會開放嘅，所以對呢個問題咧，會議咧只係唔係話要獨立處理，要其他嘅委員，相反佢哋討論嘅議程咧係比較要私下討論嘅。咁呢個咧就係如果好似點樣參與呢個房屋管理委員會咧，就係因為我哋嘅委員會入邊咧，就係可對好多事情上面同一啲決定性啦。如果你係想知道你嘅委員嘅出現所討論嘅問題啊，我就建議你係成為一份子投票成為呢個委員嘅。呢個咧就係我哋要，如果你係對呢個有興趣嘅話，成為呢個委員會嘅主席嘅其中嘅成員啦，咁你就要投票嘅。咁呢啲咧就係每個人都要依照佢嘅規則章程啦去辦事嘅。咁大致上咧就係每一個你都可以報名提名自己啦。咁當然就係如果你係有啲財務上嘅欠債啊，呢啲咁嘅情況下，你咧就係可以即係唔可以未必可以參加成為呢個委員嘅一個主席嘅。咁呢啲當然呢啲你就要向你哋嘅委員會啦嘅房屋管理部啦去查詢嘅。當然每個人都係有呢個權利去投票啦。因為我哋即係投票嘅時候都有個程序去依照啦。咁呢啲係點樣去運作啊？咁如果係有一啲情況出現，就係有啲情況出現，你係要對呢個咁嘅投票同埋呢個挑戰嘅話，呢個就係要查詢同埋攞多啲資料噶啦。OK，咁另外一個咧就係有關如果你係唔想成為呢個委員嘅主席啦，或者又唔確定係應該點樣去做啊，咁呢個咧就係都係可以去查詢嘅，就係關於有關 HOA 管理啦，同埋一啲投訴嗰方面嘅。如果你覺得你係 HOA 咧，就係冇依照佢嘅章程去辦事啦，譬如話佢未能召開呢個正常嘅會議啦，呢個例會啦，或者呢個 HOA 未必係唔俾啲委員去參與或者係去投票啦，呢個咧就係我哋加州嘅呢個法律部咧，就係房屋管理法律部咧，就可以向我哋查詢嘅。咁有啲就係未必話可以呢啲去投訴啊。咁呢個咧就係呢度咧，你可以睇下我哋呢個網址啦，就係加州總檢察辦公室嘅呢個網址啦。咁你哋可以查詢關於呢個你打開呢個網址嘅時候咧，關於房屋管理咧，就係喺第一頁啦，你就可以見到嘅。所以如果你對呢個有任何一啲投訴啊，你都可以上去我哋個網址進行呢個調查呢個投訴程序。咁下一個就係關於我哋嘅參與啦，同埋佢嘅規則啦，點樣去確保佢嘅章程去運作啦，依照佢章程去辦事啦，佢嘅運作嘅情況咧，就係你應該係會收到一個通知嘅， 嗰個通知咧就係應該會列明啦，你係犯咗啲乜嘢嘅犯規有啲咩係冇依照佢嘅房屋管理或是咧佢違反咗啲乜嘢章程啲乜嘢規則嘅。咁如果你就可以你對呢啲咁嘅信件嘅投訴啦，或者話你違反咗啲咩章程嘅，你都可以去進行呢個上訴啦，去聽公聽會嘅。咁呢啲就係將呢啲資料咧係提前咧去交俾呢個房屋管理部嘅。咁呢個咧就係雖然未必話有一定嘅幫助，但係亦都係俾時間我哋嘅房屋管理部咧去詳細了解呢個情況嘅。如果你係被如果你係被呢個指控啦，係嗰啲嘅好多唔同嘅一啲嘅投訴其他嘅委員嘅投訴啦，指控你嗰啲咁嘅情況啦，呢啲就係有我哋咧都會係進行呢個提問嘅，編一個進行呢個投訴啦，同埋投訴嘅原因啦，或者你就會收到一啲咁嘅警告信啦，有啲乜嘢或者有啲咩費用要交啦，呢啲咧都係會呢啲通知咧都係會話俾你聽，亦都係因為咁你可以按照用呢啲咁嘅收到信件之後去進行呢個上訴嘅。咁我哋咧就係有好多嘅程序嘅，但係咧我哋最主要就係等委員知道嘅。你最主要就係我哋亦都係俾機會你啦，去上訴啦，去點樣去保障自己嘅。所以呢個如果嗰啲係冇得到呢啲咁嘅保障嘅話，因為你係有權利，你就可以同我哋部門查詢嘅。咁或者我哋會詳細講下關於呢個評估嘅點樣去呢個程序啦，評估嘅程序嘅。首先咧就係最重要，都係最重要嘅。如果你係個屋主啦，你係咁咧，你就係需要呢個進行呢個評估噶啦。咁如果你係就算你係要準備要賣嗰間屋或者你都係你係都要負責呢個咁嘅評估嘅情況嘅。譬如話，如果你嘅租客啦係拒絕交呢個租嘅租啦，呢啲都係要你作為房主都係呢個負責呢個情況呢個評估嘅。咁另外一個咧就係房屋管理部咧就係委員會啦，喺 CCNR 呢個嘅章程嗰度啦，咁HOA 嗰度咧就應該有一個好長篇嘅關於呢個 CCNR 呢個咁嘅章程㗎。咁就係你照自己要熟讀呢個 CCNR 呢個章程啦，咁呢個就係我哋要講就係你除咗要交你嘅公屋費啦嘅房貸啦，咁你都要俾呢個咁嘅房屋管理呢個費用嘅，就係即係好似如果你唔交呢個 HOA 嘅話，呢個咧就係會見到嘅情況咧就係 Homeowner 啦，屋主咧就會收到呢個咁嘅 呢個債務嘅呢個亦都係有啲人就會講緊如果你係未交呢個 HOA 嘅話，即係差唔多佢情況嘅嚴重性，亦都好似你未交呢個貸款一樣嘅。佢可以佢未必係可以派你交，但係可以喺你間屋度要負責呢個影響你嘅房屋去賣。所以呢個咧就係呢個 HOA， 我哋要正視呢個 HOA 嘅情況。
嗱，咁首先咧，我係講下咧，就係咧，HOA 咧係有幾多個幾多個評估啊？咁第一個咧就係每一年嘅評估啦，就係咧呢一個嘅 HOA 咧，佢嗰個嘅費用咧係幾多啦？咁咧一般嚟講咧就係俾每個月俾啦，係有啲咧就係每一季度咧係俾嘅啊。咁呢一個嘅費用咧就係每一年咧就係有調整嘅啊。咁咧就我咧就係聽到啦，係好多人咧就係話咧係佢嗰啲嘅HOA 咧嗰啲嘅費用咧就係咧係增加咗係好多嘅。咁咧其實咧呢一個嘅條例咧就係規定咧就係咧每一年咧HOA 咧佢嗰個費用咧嘅呢一個嘅增加咧係唔可以係比舊年咧係大過呢一個20%嘅啊。咁譬如話係每一個月啦，上年咧就係呢一個嘅上一年咧係100蚊嘅話咧，咁今年嚟講咧增加咧就係最多咧係增加到係120蚊嘅啫啊。咁另外咧另外一個咧係叫做係特別嘅評估啦咁呢個嘅特別嘅呢一個咧嘅特別嘅評估咧就係唔屬於係呢一個嘅普通嗰個嘅評估裏邊嘅咁如果咧係你嗰個HOA 咧佢哋咧係增加咧係多過呢個20%嘅話咧，比去年係增加20多10%嘅話咧呢個咧就係唔啱嘅咁如果咧就係如果咧就係佢哋嘅增加嘅費用咧係唔係屬於係呢一個嘅常規嘅增加費用咧，係屬於叫特別嘅增加嘅費用啦咁呢個咧就係屬於係第二類型啦，叫做係特別嘅評估嘅咁特別嘅評估咧就係俾咧係一啲咧係冇係預計到嘅開支嘅咁譬如話係呢一個嘅HOA 咧係想係起一埲牆啦或者係一啲嘅公眾嘅地方咧佢哋係要係維修啦咁或者譬如話係一啲嘅水管或者係嗰啲嘅暖氣設備有壞啦咁呢啲咁嘅情況咧係呢個咧呢啲咁嘅特別嘅維修咧就係屬於係呢一個嘅特別嘅評估裏邊啦咁呢個如果特別嘅評估咧佢亦都係有規定咧就係話咧係唔可以係大過係每一年咧嘅財政嘅預算咧係大過5% 嘅咁就同埋咧佢呢一個增加嘅費用咧就一定咧係要係呢一個嘅所有嘅會員咧佢哋咧係批准先可以嘅咁譬如話咧有陣時咧有啲嘅情況咧就係一啲舊嘅會員咧可能佢哋咧係想有一啲嘅地方咧就係裝修咁但係有一啲嘅新嘅會員咧佢哋咧係唔想咧唔想話係有呢一個增加呢一個嘅費用 去維修呢啲嘢啊。咁所以咁嘅情況底下咧，就係咧就唔可以話咧係去係批准咧，就係去做呢一個嘅維修噶啦。咁譬如話咧，好似有一啲嘅業主啦。佢哋咧就係可能嘅收入咧又係有限啦。咁如果係突然間咧就係要加多呢一個嘅呢一個嘅HOA 嘅費用咧，可能對一啲人嚟講咧唔係咁容易係負擔嘅。咁所以嚟講咧就係如果係咁嘅情況咧，就係即係所以你哋就係要注意係有冇一啲係特別嘅評估啦。咁最後一樣嘅呢一個嘅評估啦，係叫做係呢一個嘅緊急嘅費用嘅增加。咁呢一種緊急費用嘅增加啦，係唔需要咧係會員咧係批准嘅。咁呢啲危急嘅呢一個嘅評估咧，就係咧係咧就係唔需要呢一個嘅會員咧就係呢一個批准嘅。咁不過咧呢一個嘅危急嘅評估咧呢一種嘅增加嘅費用咧就係一定咧係要係呢幾種嘅情況底下嘅。第一種咧就係有一啲咧就係有一啲嘅法庭嘅法例啦。佢哋咧係有法令落嚟咧係有一啲嘅特別嘅開支嘅。譬如話呢一個嘅法庭話咧係你哋呢一個嘅你哋呢個嘅地方咧就係要咧係做一啲嘅特別嘅維修啦。咁咧呢個咧係法庭指定落嚟，咁咧就係可以係增加呢一個嘅呢一個嘅費用啦。咁另外一樣咧就係咧呢一個嘅費用咧就係用喺咧係一啲係保護一啲嘅個人同埋嘅公共嘅安全嘅。咁譬如話咧係嗰度係有呢一個嘅火燭或者有水浸咁樣咧就變咗呢啲咧都係屬於係危急嘅情況啦。咁另外一樣咧就係咧特別嘅開支啦。咁呢個嘅特別嘅開支咧就係咧係平時咧係睇唔到嘅。咁呢一個咧嘅特別嘅費用嘅增加咧係要咧係要係用喺一個嘅特別嘅規則底下嘅。因為咧呢一個嘅如果呢一個嘅董事局咧係用呢一個嘅危急嘅評估嘅話咧，佢哋咧就一定咧係要係寫清楚究竟係乜嘢嘅危急嘅情況，就唔可以咁樣講話而家呢個係因為有危急嘅情況，所以要係增加呢個費用，唔可以咁樣講嘅。就一定要係寫清楚咧，就係講清楚係乜嘢嘅危急嘅情況，所以咧係要增加呢一個嘅費用嘅。
So again，
咁咧就因為咧呢啲嘅特別嘅評估啦，係可能咧嗰個費用咧係好大嘅。咁所以咧作為一個業主嚟講咧，就係咧應該咧就係咧係要對呢一種嘅特別嘅評估咧係有了解啦。咁你點樣可以咧係了解係
very limited reserves? Are there a lot of expenses that are not being covered? See what kind of shape the HOA is in, because if the HOA is not able to cover everything it needs to, there might be a problem and you might expect a special assessment down the road. Another thing that you should probably ask for a copy of is a copy of the budget and the reserve fund. So about once every 3 years, an HOA is supposed to do some type of analysis where they take a look at what shape the HOA is in, if they think there's going to be some expenses coming, if there needs to be some type of repairs done, and they're supposed to do this evaluation to see, okay, how much money do we think we're about to need, or how much money should we be setting aside in order to cover some upcoming improvements or changes to the HOA. And so typically that's done in the reserve fund. They'll do that type of analysis and then provide that analysis to the membership. So if you're curious to see how the HOA is doing, if there's likely going to be some upcoming repairs that are going to be needed, you'd probably find out about that either in the board meetings, because the HOA board might be discussing these matters, or you would find that in the budget and reserve fund. And that can be a good indicator if there's going to be a special assessment, because if there's a lot of repairs that are needed, and I've seen all sorts of things come through the office in terms of big repairs needed from the association and homeowners not wanting to pay, at some point, if the issue is severe enough, or if there's damage to the HOA and it really needs to be repaired, there's probably going to be a special assessment at some point to address it. So take a look at those documents. Like I said, this also might be information that's discussed at the HOA board meetings. So attend the meetings if you can, or review the board meeting minutes, because usually they're discussing these matters during those meetings, and you can get an idea if there's likely going to be some issues in terms of funding, repairs, or addressing these issues down the line. So you can prepare yourself if it's coming. You can ask the board if they're making plans on updating its amenities. For example, are there plans to put in a new gym or a new service in the lobby area? There's all sorts of updates that can be done. Ask the HOA if they're planning on doing any updates to its amenities in the near future, because that's usually going to require some type of assessment. You also, just yourself as a homeowner, can walk around the HOA, take a look at the common areas and the condition of the HOA as a whole. If you're noticing that roofs are looking a little dilapidated, or things are looking really outdated, chances are that there's probably going to need to be an assessment at some point to address the condition of the common areas. So just eyeball it if you can. The other thing is that a few other things you should be checking about is asking about the history of the HOA or the environmental practices of the HOA. If the HOA has either been sued by either members or some other entity and has legal bills to pay, or has violated.
如果你係有一啲咁嘅法律事件，一啲嘅債務要支付嘅話咧，你就可以需要交嘅。咁之後咧就係同你嘅鄰居去了解啦，到底呢個房屋管理係有啲咩問題啦。好，下一個。如果你係發覺你係喺一個情況咧，就係被拖欠嘅，就房屋管理處係被拖欠嘅話咧，你就可以如果你就係如果間屋係喺呢個情況之下先至可以需要進行呢個拍賣嘅。就係如果你係喺維修嗰度延遲咗，未達到呢個預期嘅話，譬如你個維修係低過1,800蚊喺12個月嘅話咧，咁你嗰個付款咧，咁你就係需要如果係多過1,800嘅情況咧，又唔一樣嘅。譬如話你係個評估咧係500蚊嘅，你係已經遲咗4個月未交，咁變相係要2000蚊嘅話，咁嘅意思即係話你已經超過咗佢呢個限定個稅嗰個課稅嘅話，咁佢就會將你嘅事件就交俾個小債前額嗰度噶啦。就要求你支付呢個拖欠嘅。咁另外一個就係關於呢個拍賣嘅時候咧， 如果係多過1800係或者12個月嘅呢個咁嘅拖欠嘅話，就會進行呢個非司法嘅拍賣程序嘅。咁而另外一個就係房屋管理處嘅呢個拍賣程序啦。當然佢哋就唔係話我聽日就將你間屋攞走咁個委員個房屋管理處咧，就係首先就會係進行呢個評估啦，就睇下你嗰個嘅拖欠嘅債務咧，然之後咧就會係提供一啲解決嘅方案啦，俾你嘅，或者我哋有俾個時間啦，或者係一個拖欠嘅，咁譬如一個抵押啦，有啲咩抵押嘅，咁嗰個好似亦都會通知你係信件通知啦，喺30日之前咧進行呢個信件通知，亦都係睇下你係點樣支付呢個咁嘅拖欠嘅債嗰個拖欠啦，有時呢咁呢個咧就唔係因為你違反咗啲咩章程，我哋講緊嘅，而係講緊你係拖欠咗佢呢個房屋管理處管理嘅呢個費用嘅所以就係如果佢哋就會係進行就會係進行呢個房屋管理會進行呢個拍賣，但係問題佢就會通知你，就睇下你有啲咩行動可以去解決到呢個拖欠嘅情況嘅。咁如果你係到你拍賣嘅時候，將嗰啲錢咧，就會還翻你所拖欠嘅呢個費用啦，管理費咧係交翻俾呢個房屋管理處嘅。咁呢個咧就係佢哋會係進行會第一個通知啦，第一個通知你通知個屋主啦，第二個就通知呢個市府啦，呢個當呢個情況係大概係最少係90日啦，你有90日嘅限期咧，進行呢個咁嘅房屋拍賣呢個通知，咁就會話俾你聽你個時間啦，係你時間啦，同埋呢間屋將幾時會進行嘅。所以如果呢啲咁嘅通知咧，所有嘅文件咧、書信通知咧都會有呢個記錄嘅，係直到係你就會係第一個通知30日啦，然之後係有90日嘅通知啦，所以呢個係第一次每一次都會呢個記錄嘅。當然，如果你係揾到一個機會點樣去支付支付咗呢啲咁嘅拖欠嘅譬如話，如果你支欠咗呢啲拖欠啦，咁 HOA 咧就冇權係幫你把你間屋咧係進行呢個拍賣㗎啦，所以當然就係喺通知你好多次有記錄嘅，而冇支付呢個咁嘅拖欠嘅話咧，你就會係進行呢個間屋嘅拍賣。如果你係將所有拖欠嘅一啲債務啦，全部都找清咗啦，咁所有咧，所有嘅一啲費用啦，有關嘅拖欠嘅費用嘅話，喺90日之內係支付嘅話咧，咁呢個咧就係唔會將你間屋拍賣，所以呢個一個係其中一個好處就係房屋管理處會有呢個通知。最主要咧，房屋管理處就係希望可以解決到呢個情況，去拖欠嘅呢個管理費，而佢哋就唔需要進行採取呢個咁嘅房屋拍賣呢個行為。當然，如果你不幸嘅事，如果你係喺 你間屋係被呢個房屋管理處拍賣嘅話，希望你哋盡快直接聯絡啦，尋求呢個協助嘅。咁呢個咧就係有好多情況出現啦。如果一啲譬如話佢係其他一啲情況出現咧，就係關於拖欠嘅情況，就係一啲抵押記錄啦。如果譬如話佢哋唔俾你出席一啲咁嘅會議啦，或者唔可以使用佢一個嗰個共用嘅樓梯啦，又或者係一個拖欠，會因為唔准你出啦，唔准你出入嗰個你嘅房屋啦，或者唔准你出席一啲會議啦，甚至一啲嘅你都係咁咧，有啲人就想知道，如果我違反咗呢個房屋管理嘅規條嘅話嘅條例，咁會點樣咧？我間屋係咪會被亦都係會提問到嘅？就當然佢就係呢啲唔代表佢就可以告你啦所以咁另外一個咧就係關於呢個財務呢個債務嘅收集啦，就係點樣去收翻你嘅債務啦。咁其中咧，你有啲嘅權利啦，你嘅權利就係有權參與解決呢個權利嘅，有權參與嘅，同埋亦都透過書信啦去要求呢個嘅參與啦，呢個嘅規條啦 ，David Steering Act 啦另外一個就係你有權去參與呢個討論啦，關於呢個付錢嘅計劃嗰方面當然你就係我哋要知道非常之即係有個唔好嘅就係佢哋未必可以討論關於呢個一啲支付費嘅交費一啲計劃係啦另外一個就係當你交費嘅時候啦，你可以用佢可以選擇一啲唔同嘅收費渠道啦。當然你要譬如話你交支票嘅話，希望盡量嗰張支票唔好被彈票啦。
So keep that in mind because we see a lot of clients who
所以咧
call
就
us
係確保就係我哋
is required to sign this payment plan agreement to be able to pay my HOA dues, and they made me waive my rights. So now whenever I make a payment,
咁呢個咧就係出邊咧有呢個情況出現啦，需要我簽署一啲咁嘅交費嘅計劃啦，但係咧我就冇權去參與我就放棄咗我嘅權利啦，所以呢個咧就係你哋要留意啦。如果當你哋被要求去簽
the other thing I like to warn people is if you
時候，
fall behind on your assessments, it can
另外一個就係
and here's why. In addition to your delinquent assessments, you might be responsible for paying collection costs from a collection company, which frankly, collection companies can charge hundreds of dollars just for single letters. They're very expensive. You can also be charged a late charge or a late fee of either 10% of the assessment or $10 per month. So for example, if your regular assessment is $300, then you could have a late charge of up to $30 for being delinquent that month. The other thing is that you can also be charged interest on those delinquent amounts up to 12% per year. So when you think about all of those different costs, delinquent assessments can really add up and you can really get into a really
咁呢個咧就係我哋
doesn't mean that you don't have rights and it doesn't mean there aren't options available to you. It just means be aware and it might be helpful to get a little bit of one-on-one guidance if that's the situation you're in. And then I would add the HOA is not supposed to, while they can charge a lot, they're not supposed to be charging you for costs that they didn't incur. They're not supposed to be trying to make a profit off of homeowners. So that's the other thing to look out for. Next slide. I will say if you are being charged for something and you do not agree with it, my recommendation would be do not withhold payments. You don't have a right to withhold payments as a homeowner. Rather, you should make the payment, but do it
咁另外一
under
個咧，關於個交費嗰度啦，咁咧你就冇權去去停止呢個咁嘅交費嘅。咁你可以係寫字係 pay under protest 嘅意思，即係話你係有呢個權啦，去一啲去報告一啲嘅費用咧，係唔係你要交嘅費用嚟嘅？
I already talked about pre-lien notice requirements. I'm not going to cover that. So next slide, please.
所以呢個咧就係你就頭先講緊係啲按壓啦，你啲錢係唔可以被扣押嘅。咁呢個咧就係我哋有一啲資訊啦，係提供俾大家嘅，就係如果你喺房屋管理部嗰度協會有啲咩情況嘅話、問題嘅話咧，你都可以同我哋聯絡嘅。我哋就係咁房屋署啦，同埋嗰個房屋管理處咧，都係有呢個有呢個關於呢個連接咧資訊咧，係俾大家去查詢嘅。甚至我哋有個熱線電話啦，可以提供俾大家去打電話諮詢嘅。所以如果你係另外一個服務我哋提供嘅咧就係咁咧市府辦公室咧就係有提供呢個咁嘅經濟資助啦，去協助一啲關於房屋管理費被拖欠嘅點樣尋找一啲經濟資助嘅呢個計劃啦，係提供俾大家嘅。如果你係對呢方面有興趣申請嘅話，你哋可以去向我哋查詢嘅。所以除咗嗰方面財務嗰方面協助啦，亦都可以有其他嘅資訊去提供俾大家嘅。咁頭先咧，我哋就係講咗關於呢個房屋管理協會嘅一啲事務啦、規則咁樣嘅。咁我哋咧亦都係而家咧就係有一個律師部啦，都係有呢個房屋經濟部啦，甚至會提供關於點樣去辦理呢個房產信託呢啲嘅資訊提供俾大家嘅。咁我哋嘅電話號碼咧係510-710，應該係你係喺呢個屏幕度應該見到我哋嘅聯絡資料啦。510-271-8443嘅嚇，咁你哋可以隨時同我哋聯絡啦，有關呢個房屋管理協會嘅一啲嘅資訊嘅。所以我哋都會有特別嘅情況啦，解決佢哋嘅協助提供一啲資訊嘅。咁今日呢個咧就係亦都係總結我哋今日嘅會議嘅議程啦。我陣間仲會盡量去解答你哋嘅問題嘅。
So I see a question about special assessments and how much an HOA can levy at one time. As I mentioned, special assessments are not supposed to be more than 5% of the annual budget from the previous year. So it depends on how much the budget was for your HOA the previous year. And if enough people in the association vote to approve a larger increase, that is legal. Okay, let's see. what is required in terms of an investigation of structural integrity of the balconies and overhead stairways under California law? So that's a very complicated question. In terms of associations, they're supposed to, like I said, they're supposed to do some type of survey of the association and see what types of issues need to be addressed. In terms of the structural issues or condition of the HOA, in general, the rule of thumb is if it's part of the outer part of the association, or if it's part of the common areas, that's usually a responsibility of the HOA to maintain and to provide upkeep. If it's an issue that is internal to your unit, that's usually an individual member's responsibility where they take it up with their homeowners insurance company to try and get it covered that way. I see, is it lawful for renters or other non-owners to be members of the HOA board? Typically not. You're usually supposed to be a member and owner of the association. As I said before, the requirements to be on the board are outlined in your bylaws. So you're going to want to check your bylaws for those rules. It says, is the spouse of an owner legally an owner even if their name is not on the deed? So the thing with spouses, I believe there's some rule in Davis Sterling, although I'd have to go back and check. I'm not even sure if this has changed, but typically there are votes available for spouses of legal owners. But that is one of those scenarios where I'd probably need to take a look at your particular scenario and then do a little bit of legal research. But if I'm recalling correctly, I do believe that there are votes available for spouses of legal owners. Looks like we have a question about executive sessions. This question has to do with, are there supposed to be notes done for the executive session meetings? And then there's a question about what does it mean when the note should be generally noted? So in general, what's supposed to happen in an executive session, like I said, usually those are private matters. So you will see notes about generally what happened. You're not going to get detailed blow by blow notes of what happened because a lot of the matters that are discussed in an executive session are private. So there are notes available, but it's not going to be super detailed. I see a question about, let's see. If an HOA continually defers repairs because of concerns about adequate funds, can the HOA claim to have an adequate reserve? So it gets back to assessments in general. If this is a repair that's necessary because it's a safety issue, then there should be some type of assessment passed and covered and the repair should be done. The HOA can't allow the association to be in such disrepair that it's a danger in terms of a personal safety issue. But there are certain repairs or upgrades that are not an emergency, are not a matter of personal safety. And a lot of HOAs do defer those costs because not enough of the membership wants to vote to pass a special assessment to pay for it. So unfortunately, sometimes you will see HOAs push off a lot of those big bills because not enough of the membership is ready to make that type of commitment, financial commitment. So only really if it's an emergency or a matter of personal safety that you're going to see a requirement in a big bill that doesn't necessarily get approved by the membership. Is a special assessment $10,000 levied to each owner, or is the amount spread out over all members? That's a good question. So the way special assessments work is usually there's one large bill that's owed, and then what will happen is the association will send out a notice of what your pro rata share or your individual share of that special assessment will be. It kind of depends on what the special assessment is for. If, for example, it's for certain types of roof repairs or something that like square footage would be appropriate, the association might decide to split that cost based on the size of your unit. So people with larger units might have to pay a little bit more, whereas someone with a smaller unit would pay less. A lot of special assessments, they just divide the bill evenly amongst all the homeowners. But when I mentioned the example of a $40,000 or $50,000 assessment, that was the individual portion for that homeowner because it was such a massive repair that was being done. almost to the point where it was a little questionable, but I have seen very, very large special assessments for individuals. It says, how do we know if HOA is being honest about assessments and not pocketing the revenue or splitting it between board members? So this gets back to asking for the financial statements of the HOA and the budgets. You have a right to documentation from the Homeowners Association. You have a right to get copies of that documentation. And if you think that there's something underhanded happening, you can always make a complaint to the Attorney General's office, as I mentioned. I see a question about if we seek legal assistance against an HOA, can we contact your office, or there are attorneys who specialize in dealing with HOAs? It depends on what the issue is. Our office tries to spend most of our time helping folks who are in foreclosure or are at risk of losing their homes. That's just part of the mission of our office. We don't tend to take on big cases around structural integrity of the whole HOA building, but we can provide referrals if you'd like. So if that's something you're concerned about, it depends on what the legal issue is, but you can call our office for a referral if you need one. Okay, it says HOA, your HOA recently raised the dues by 20% after several years of no dues. And then it says board has taken over after a period in which older residents had dominated the board and refused to raise the dues. And now older residents of the HOA are now threatening to sue the board for age discrimination.
咁呢個年長嘅呢個講緊提問嘅就係一啲年長嘅人士咧被呢個房屋管理係恐嚇嘅，所以呢個咧我就係需要係要調查啦。咁你如果喺呢個情況之下，我覺得需要係1對1咁樣嘅進行呢個解答嘅，因為咁嘅話，我覺得咁樣比較了解個情況啦，去幫助你嘅。睇下仲有冇咩問題。
So if I'm understanding this question correctly, there's a question about HOA minutes. So oftentimes
呢個咧就係喺HOA 嘅議程嗰度啦。咁我哋需要有呢個記錄啦，好似會議嘅議程啊，呢個會議嘅筆錄嘅嘅摘錄啦。咁呢啲我哋都係需要做記錄嘅。會議完之後喺嗰啲會議嘅議程會議嘅內容都要進行呢個記錄㗎啦。咁你哋可以作為委員啦。你哋可以要求以書信啦，要求一份複印本嘅，呢個你哋都係有權嘅。OK， 咁呢個咧就係。
This is an excellent question and actually not uncommon. Sometimes the
呢個咧
really does not approve of how the property company is conducting business. Usually what you want to do is complain to the board.
咁通常咧，作為一個你通常都係會向呢個委員房屋管理處啦去進行呢個投訴或者係有啲咩提問。如果係一啲個別嘅情況關於呢個個人嘅房屋管理啦嗰方面咧，你就係可以同我哋去尋求呢個咧就係提問咧，就係有冇一啲咩資訊啦、資源咧可以提供俾我哋嘅 HOA 嘅委員啦，去申請咁樣嘅。咁呢個咧就係市府咧，通常佢係每個城市咧，佢嘅都有呢個咁嘅咁我哋希望咧，你哋就係委員嗰度啦，去聘請一啲人士啦，去進行呢個咁嘅評估啦，所以好似呢個咁呢個咧就係因為我哋有一啲專業嘅人士啦，聘請一啲專業人士進行呢個房屋嘅評估、修理或者情況嘅，所以呢個就係我哋係可以去。 如果你係喺委員會入邊嘅咧，房屋委員會嘅成員啦，咁你可以同你哋嘅房屋管理部嘅呢個律師部啦，去了解啦，一啲最新嘅情況啦，點樣去呢個咧就係最主要就係想知道要知道就係出邊嘅市場嘅一啲嘅事務啦嘅情況係點樣嘅，一啲嘅規則啦，需要了解啦，或者喺你個委員會房屋管理協會嘅程序度有啲咩資訊要更新啦，咁樣嘅，所以呢啲都係可以同你哋嘅查詢嘅。咁如果係屋主咧，就係咁你可以問到呢個問題咧，就係房產嗰方面嘅一啲我而家咧就冇呢方面嘅資料啦，咁我就想可以當然如果你係想知道呢個生存信託呢個情況當然亦都係一樣啦，所以最好就係1對1進行呢個對話嘅。如果你係有一啲咁咧你就關於呢個貸款嗰方面咧，你亦都可以查詢啦，睇下有邊啲係貸款啦，係合乎你呢個嘅要求啦，你嘅資格嘅，所以呢啲亦都係可以查詢嘅。咁另外一個就係關於調查嗰方面，咁你就可以同一啲部門啦、一啲經紀啦去聯絡啦，
I think it's like $10, something like that. So there can be a small fee to copy records. So just keep that in mind if you're asking for a copy of HOA records. What happens if no one wants to join the board? Well, that's a good question.
咁呢個提問係非常之好嘅。如果冇人想參加成為呢個房屋協會嘅委員會嘅話，點算呢？呢個係非常之好嘅提問啦。當然我哋有呢個情況嘅，因為好多時候都係同樣嘅人啦，係每一年都係同樣嘅人去參加呢個委員嘅協會嘅。
To dismantle an association if really no one in the association wants there to be an HOA, but it's kind of complicated and usually requires a little bit of guidance from an HOA attorney. But that's the other flip side of things, is if no one wants to participate and no one wants the HOA, maybe that's something that should be disassembled. But more likely than not, there's going to be at least one person willing to do the job, and they just may end up doing it year after year. Okay, are there property management companies for smaller HOAs? Yes, there are. I don't make any particular recommendations about any property management companies. I have yet to run into one that I think is really fantastic, but you just have to search around for property management companies. They may not give you a ton of attention if you have a smaller HOA, but they do exist, and it can be very helpful.
咁呢個咧就係提問到就係出邊有冇一啲咁嘅機構啦，可以進行呢個房屋管理嘅，當然係有啦。我而家唔做一啲推薦啦，但係你哋可以做一啲調查啦，出邊係有一部分辦公室啦幫進行個房屋管理協會嘅業務。
Contract with the property management company. And the good news is, if you're a member of the association, you can see a copy of that contract because it's an agent of the HOA. Take a look and see what the contract says in terms of amount of time. Maybe it's just at will in terms of how long they're being hired for. So it kind of depends on the contract with the individual property management company. Okay, can HOAs prevent owners from installing Amazon's Ring videos that infringe on other owners' privacy? This is not an issue that has come up that often. What I will say is, my instinct would say it depends on what it says in your CC&Rs. So your CC&Rs, as I said during the presentation, that has to do with property use restrictions. So there might be something in the CC&Rs that says you cannot use X, Y, and Z services, or you can't have certain things outside of your unit. There might be a provision in your CC&Rs that prevent that type of Ring video or audio doorbell for being installed. So it depends on your CC&Rs. If there's not a provision, then I would say you probably are in the clear, but it sounds like something that might need a little bit more of a discussion one-on-one. And then our last question says, does HOA insurance cover interior walls and installed structures? So typically the HOA insurance has to do with the general structure of the HOA, the outsides, common areas. It's usually your individual homeowner's insurance. It's going to cover the interior of the.
咁呢個 HOA 通常咧大致上係負責外牆啦，你間屋嘅外牆啦，而室內咧就係由個屋主負責嘅一個呢啲嘅責任險咯。
In this case, if you have, this is somebody who put in an anonymous question. This is something I think would require.
呢個一個係無名氏提出嘅一個問題提問嘅。咁呢個咧，佢呢個提問咧，就係我建議佢咧，就係去聯絡我哋部門啦。呢個亦都係同樣嘅人。同樣嘅問題，外牆啊，同埋地氈啊、樓樓啊嗰啲咁嘅情況。咁另外一個就係我哋可唔可以之前關於呢個咁嘅投票咧？當然我哋就唔可以去告呢個委員啦，但係。作為一個獨立嘅呢個房屋管理處協會嘅話咧，你哋可以去進行內部嘅討論啦。因為如果你係進行呢個告嘅呢個程序咧，係非常之昂貴啦，亦都係要時間性啦。所以當然你就唔可以話隨便去告一個人，因為你唔中意佢。所以我哋嘅委員房屋管理協會咧，係可唔可以將佢呢個評估啦，去修呢個情況咧，係放入去我哋嘅議程或者我哋嘅房屋管理協會嘅條例入邊咧？咁呢個就係要睇或者要。通過呢個協會嘅評估啦，去透過一啲特別嘅會議啦，提出呢個特別嘅情況啦，而去睇下有冇人會對呢方面有對點樣去解決啦，亦都如果你係嗰方面係唔可以讓佢進行嘅話，你就可以喺會議嗰度進行呢個討論嘅，喺提出嘅。咁我哋有人要求我哋將我哋嘅頭先所講嘅內容啦嘅題目啦去分享。呢個就係。就好似我頭先講啦，如果我哋嘅會議呢度係未解決到呢啲個人嘅一啲特別嘅情況，你哋可以隨時同我哋部門聯絡嘅。
can join us next week for Hera's
多
presentation.
謝你哋出席我哋今日嘅會議啦。咁希望你哋出席我哋下一次嘅會議，關於防止呢個